What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I'm just making a video today. There was an article that I read from Armando Salguero at the Miami Herald. Sure you guys know who he is, and overall, I don't read a lot of Miami Herald stuff because I don't have a subscription to them, but I do, see tweets and stuff of his, and then whatever of his comes across, Bleacher Report, and then every once in a while I'll get like an article of his that'll come across my Twitter feed, and that's how I saw this one. And but overall, I like Armando Salguero. I like, he still misses some things and leaves some things out, and he makes mistakes and is wrong about things, but I think generally he has a pretty good perspective and does include a lot of things that other people won't include in their analysis. I think he has a generally more full and I just like his approach and his style too. If I'm keeping it honest. But anyway, so there was this article I read, and it was interesting. Let's see. Dolphins coach Brian Flores basically says, this is the title of the article. Dolphins coach Brian Flores basically saying that a quote of his, "Team success and failure riding on these players." So I'm just going to say right off the bat, and then we'll get into this, that I find it funny how he's saying, now, on one hand, obviously the success of the team is going to ride on the players that are on the team because they're going to be the ones playing the game, right? And so if they win or if they lose, obviously there's a portion of that the responsibility that falls on them. But there is also a portion of that responsibility that falls, of course, on the coaching staff, of the people who, picked those players and brought them in. Did they prioritize properly? Did they draft well? Are they good at player evaluation? And can they develop players, right? And so, it's just funny because it sounds like, to me, it just sounds like a very shift the responsibility off of myself kind of a thing. Now, whatever. Like, a lot of people would be like, oh, you just don't like him. And I don't like him, to be honest. That's fair. But it really is. I mean, that's the kind of thing you say when you try and shift the responsibility off of yourself. And we already know that he has a say in every single, because he's said that himself. Same thing like back in 2019. Nothing's changed. Of course, he's got a say in everything. In all of the players that are on his team. But the difference between this time and Adam Gase's time here, for example, the Adam Gase tenure was the only time, from what I can understand, of Stephen Ross's tenure as the majority owner of the Miami Dolphins, where he actually had a hands-off approach and let the coach run everything. He didn't like that very much, especially when Adam Gase told him he was not going to tank the 2019 season because he believes in Ryan Tannehill and knows what he can do if you just build a proper team around him, which he's been proving in Tennessee. And actually, that game this year against the Titans will be a very interesting one. I am looking forward to. But anyway, so, he believed in him, and he refused, and then he got fired. But every other time before Adam Gase, when it was Philbin, and before that, or after Adam Gase with Flores, it's been Ross's show again, because that's how he likes to do things. He likes to have a very hands-on approach. He's proven to be terrible at it, but, that's the way he does things. And so, yes, obviously Brian Flores does have a say, and he is part of the decision making for so he does have a responsibility or a culpability in those decisions, right? And the players that are picked, everybody talked about Hunter Long being, a Flores guy, and, in the post draft press conference, he was gushing about him, et cetera, right? So of course he's got a say in him. So it's just funny to me that now it's like, he's saying, oh, well, it's as if it's like all them. Well, you pick these guys. Now, whatever. People will say like, oh, you're just, whatever. I don't even know. Being negative or whatever. I don't know. But, I mean, like, you gotta own it too, bro. Because you had these fucking... Anyway, so let's get into this article. Because Armando Salguero makes, some interesting points here. Build through the draft. Oh, by the way, let's note, though, that, just to reiterate one more time, my philosophy is to build through the draft. That is the primary way where you're going to get the best talent, the youngest talent, et cetera, et cetera. But you obviously do got to balance out a little bit and supplement through free agency to help get some of that veteran leadership and experience, et cetera, et cetera. But you're frugal in free agency and you do your major investments in the draft. And then you have to be able to have a good sound plan for how you draft, which, a couple of my main points is I don't chase any players. I would never take a quarterback in rounds 1 or 2, but take one, every year or every other year, at least at a bare minimum in rounds 3 or later, every year, every other year. Depending on how, greatly I need it. I would never trade up, but I would always trade back, etc., etc. So, and then, but also, and then the one final philosophy is best player available. Yeah, but if you're smart about things and if you operate in a fully sound philosophical manner, right? Like if your entire game plan, right? Because there's a game plan for these guys is very complex, right? Because you have the cap stuff that you have to think about, free agency, the draft, you have to think about what the needs are on your team, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of different aspects to it. So if you have a good sound plan across the board, and if you do things right, and if you're efficient in the way you handle things, then you should always be able to get one of the top talents available in the draft, right? So I'm actually kind of talking just simply first round right now. So in the first round, you should always be able to get one of the top talents in the draft at a position that you really need. Now, of course, I value positions differently because, quarterback is super important, but it's a team sport. And I always start in the trenches on offense and defense. It always has to start there, in my opinion. And because, it doesn't matter how good your quarterback is. If your offensive line sucks, they're going to get mauled, et cetera, et cetera. Can't open up run lanes and all of that. So, I actually would invest in... I would make sure before I would never take a quarterback in rounds 1 or 2, but that's because in the early rounds, what I would do is I would start with my lines, right? So I would invest early draft capital in the best offensive linemen and defensive linemen, depending on which one I actually need more. So, in our case, offensive linemen, I would have taken Penei Sewell, right? I would have gone edge rusher with our 18th overall pick. I personally would not have taken the dude that's got serious injury history, and at the very least, you likely can't expect him to have a long career with you. Maybe he has a fucking a super flashy first year or a second year or whatever, and then you lose him to concussions and injuries. You could lose him this year to concussions and injuries, right? And he could end up being a complete bust because of that. So, I would have took Greg Rousseau, or, if you like Kwity Paye better, fine, whatever. I would have taken one of the other guys, right? But then I would have gotten, either I would have took a running back, or, Javonte Williams went one ahead of us because of the Broncos. So, okay, I like safety. I wouldn't have taken Javon Holland. I did like Merrick the best, but the injury concerns there are absolutely valid. So, in my opinion, I'd have gone with Richie Grant. I definitely wouldn't have traded up to get an offensive lineman at 42. Even if you loved Eichenberg, I can virtually guarantee they could have had him there. Or if not, there was still a million other ones. And Miners definitely would have been the way better choice. They could have stayed. They could have kept that third round pick from next year. And they could have got Miners at 50, right? That would have been an acceptable time to take him. Yeah, he fell much further than that. Or a bit further than that. Not much, but a bit further than that. But that's how, so that's what I would have done, right? Because that's, to me, that's what's most important based off of the needs. I went into that thinking the Dolphins' needs were offensive line, mostly interior, particularly at center, then defensive line, particularly on the edge, pass rusher, but we do need some help still, at least rotationally, in the interior. Let's see, that's second. And then third was safety. Third for me was safety. Fourth was then running back / linebacker. Then, man, I'm trying to keep this straight every time. And then, what was it? Wide receiver and corner and tight end, basically all kind of bunched up there at the back end. Anyway, so, and I would absolutely, but you got to think of my entire philosophy, right? So I'd be taking quarterbacks at least every other year in the mid to late rounds, right? You have to be able to develop them, of course. But so then I can afford to use my early draft capital and making sure I get the beasts of the beasts, right? The best of the best for the offensive line. The players that are going to give you the highest probability of becoming elite talents. And you can right? And if you do things like this year, you get an offensive tackle. And like this year, we could have gotten Sewell and Miners, right? So that's your left guard and center. Next year, we could have gotten a right tackle and whatever, right? Like, that's... you can't get everything in a single draft, so you do the best you can. But, and that's how you build through the draft, right? So that's absolutely the way to do it. But let's keep it real. So far, the Dolphins, under this regime, has not done all that well at that. They've already cut 3 players from their first 2 drafts, and their first 2 drafts have been pretty underwhelming. And even... with this one, their most promising, they still didn't prioritize properly. They still reached on some players, and they still took players who have massive injury concerns. I don't know why they love taking such risks, but when you do that, when you play with fire, when you like to light off fucking firecrackers in your living room, well, eventually, probably a lot sooner than eventually in that last case, you're going to have an issue, right? So, and they might even end up, cutting 1 or 2 more from their first couple drafts before we even get to this next season, which to me would be pretty astounding. Anyway, let's get through this article. So I do agree with... that was kind of a long-winded way of saying, I agree with building through the draft, but, they haven't really done that. They haven't done it well. They've also been super aggressive in free agency. Sure, this year they weren't, but that was because their plans got foiled by Deshaun Watson having extreme legal issues all of a sudden, right? So, anyway, and that's not even, out of the realm of possibility if the legal battles do end up getting settled. Anyway, built through the draft. That's the clarion call throughout the NFL, because sometimes that's how teams rise to greatness. But sometimes, as with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who added a certain star quarterback and a bunch of his friends to get a Super Bowl victory 3 months ago, the draft is a smaller part of the formula. Yes, okay, but that lets know. Now, and to be fair, right, because I didn't see them making the Super Bowl, let alone winning it. I was wrong about that, clearly. But let's be clear about it, though, right? That's not going to guarantee the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a reign of dominance for the next decade or two, right? As great as Tom Brady is, and as Superman as he might be, and sure, maybe he plays until he's 70 years old, I don't know. Like, I honestly, anyway, never mind. So I was gonna go off on a little side thing about how fucked up he's eventually gonna end up being because of how long he's playing. But anyway, like, as great as he may be, it's only a temporary solution, right? And so, and so are some of those other guys like Gronk, right? That's not a forever thing for sure. And so are some of those other guys. So, they are going to have to do other things to do, and the draft is the way to do that. That's how you build for the future and for long-term sustained success. Anyway, for the Miami Dolphins, the draft is the thing. Well, it should be. That's not my opinion. That's the opinion of head coach Brian Flores. So, and this is a quote from Brian Flores. The guys we got in 19, the guys we got in 20, the guys we got in 21, that we got in this draft, that's the team. So, again, and I agree, right? Like, that's how you should build your team. But their drafts have not been very great so far. Hopefully they can start taking some leaps. But they are really betting the fucking everything on so many cases of just like high risk, high reward. And so, at the beginning of last season, I've been saying it the whole time, of course, but I really started talking about how that, that's when I started doing the hashtag prove it, and, saying that this team is built for very, very boom or very, very bust, right? There is like a super high ceiling on this team, but there is a ton of potential for it to all completely derail, because there is so many guys and so many super important and high investment players that you have decided to take with serious injury histories, like Jalen Phillips, like your franchise quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, right? Who's undersized and has a significant injury history, and in fact sustained 2 injuries last year. Thankfully, they were minor, but will they be this year when if and when? And I mean, look, even if the offensive line, does take a massive step forward, which I am very skeptical about, and they have to this year. If they really want to be what they, say they are, and what they aspire to be, they have to take a tremendous step forward, and it's asking a lot. And so, but even if they do, one wrong hit, Tannehill, I know, whatever, everybody, but like, labeling him, anybody that labels him injury prone is absurd. He has literally had 1 injury, and it was a freak accident. It's just, what can you do? That's football. A dude's helmet made direct contact with his knee. It is what it is, bro. But before that and after that, he has been a fucking man of steel. And in fact, he even had that, and I'm not totally unconvinced that, that had something to do with the reason why he named his son Steel. But anyway, whatever. So like, he had that, right? Because for the first few seasons, for the first several seasons of his time with the Dolphins, he was always there, always available, and he would take some big shots. But one wrong hit can do it, and he's a small, undersized guy, and he's got a lot to work on. By the way, I also want to mention, if they intend to use Jalen Waddle on special teams, and if they end up cutting Jakeem Grant, especially, I think that will be a huge, huge mistake. And I hope it does not happen, of course. But there is the chances of them ending up hurting their first round pick, getting their first round pick hurt, drastically increases. If I'm not mistaken, when he hurt his ankle last season, it was playing special teams. If they decide to do that, which I think there is a high probability of them doing, especially if they end up cutting Jakeem Grant, I think that's going to be a massive mistake. But anyway, so He's saying it, right? He's saying it. Everything's riding on the guys that he and Greer picked. Well, look, and they had 10 wins last year, man, but I mean, at the very least, you're kidding yourself if you don't think that they overachieved. They absolutely overachieved. They should not have been a 10-win season, a 10-win team. They should not have made it to the playoffs, and they didn't, and they couldn't, you know, even though there was an expanded playoff format, right? And let's note that I know everybody hates when I talk about Gase, but Gase took us to the playoffs, right? People like to reference, oh, well, we haven't been to the playoffs since 16, but who took us there? Gase did, and we went 10-6 and made it to the playoffs. So, you know, and he couldn't do that. Brian Flores couldn't do that in his second season after intentionally throwing his first season like a coward and like a sellout, if I'm being honest. He couldn't do it in his second season, even though he won 10 games while overachieving and in an expanded playoff format, while also being helped to some of those wins because, for example, you know, teams like the 49ers, Jets, etc. were super hurt. I mean, you know, I know those are the two primary examples I use, but even the Bills, right? Like, the first time we played them, they were missing their two top linebackers, and Milano and I forget the other kid's name right now, but right? And so, like, we didn't win that game, to be fair, but we were able to perform better on offense than what we would have because, you know, we were able to attack the middle of the field in ways that we wouldn't have been able to if those guys were there. So, and that was rampant throughout the entire season because, of course, COVID and the subsequent injuries that were a result of not having a full off season, et cetera, et cetera. And so they were helped to a 10-win season. And also, you know, again, man, when I harp on this because nobody ever says anything about it, right? People will acknowledge that Tua had a rocky season and whatever. You know, sometimes they'll mention that, you know, he needs to be more confident and, you know, aggressive and quicker with his reads and his decision making. But I've heard nobody talk about the fact, and it's funny too, man, because there was a show, I want to say it was on the Phins side, and they were talking about, you know, quarterbacks, and I can't remember who it was, or no, it wasn't anybody in particular, I don't think. They were just mentioning, one of the guys was mentioning that, you know, out of all the quarterbacks in the league, blah, blah, blah. No, they were talking about somebody. I can't remember who it was. But they were talking about, they pulled up a general stat about the quarterbacks, about all the quarterbacks in the league and what their, you know, would-be interception, you know, ratio is. The reconfigured number, right, or the updated number after you take into account the would-be interceptions that your quarterback would have thrown but just weren't, right? But nobody ever wants to mention that about Tua. The dude threw 10 plus interceptions last year. Just a bunch of them didn't count because he got fucking super lucky, man. But some of that, you know, could be that some, you know, the teams, it could go back to, you know, injuries and stuff and COVID, because maybe some teams just didn't have their fucking, you know, their starting lineup, and so their backups couldn't squeeze the ball or whatever, right? You know, some of them were called back on penalties, whatever, but he got super fucking lucky. Anyway, whatever. There's a lot. And so, but this is what you do, man. This is how you go through the entire picture, right? Because shit like this is nuanced, and you have to look at all of the data, not just the data that suits your narrative, right? Like, you gotta. So anyway, back to the story here. So he's saying it, you know, it's all on these guys, the guys we picked. All right, so let's keep going. Flores, so, you know, that's what Flores told Peter King in the latest Football Morning in America column. You know what I mean? That's the team moving forward. As we move forward, that's going to be the crux or the big chunk of our team. I think he misspoke there. Crux, I don't think is exactly what he meant to say. And he said, you know, I assume corrected himself by saying, or, you know, the big chunk of our team. Anyway, small just thing there to point out, because I'm very attention to detail. They'll be the reason why we make noise or don't make noise. Okay, that's true. Again, the players on the field certainly have a lot to do with that, but you picked these players, right? And you're responsible for developing these players, which you've been not very good at to this point. I mean, it's true, right? There's not, if you look at the players that they've picked, there's not one to this point that is proven. I mean, a bunch of them, again, there is a ton of boom potential. There's a bunch of guys that have super high ceilings and could be, but none of, and to be fair, you know, 2019 class is only in year 3, 2020 class is only in year 2, and 2021 class is, you know, rookies. But they're trying to build sustainably for the future and also win immediately, which is a lot to do, especially with the way the wrecking ball way you're doing it, right? Completely destroy the team in 2019, you know, overperform in 2020 once you're actually starting to like build the team back up, and now you're, you know, you've just drafted 2 rounds of players, 2 drafts worth of players, etc. But now your expectations are 10 plus wins, make it to the playoffs at a minimum. That is a minimum, right? And it's a little crazy to me. Anyway, this is a bold statement in the context of the fact the Dolphins spent more money in free agency than any other team in 2020. It's also notable considering the team's top 2 most accomplished players, cornerback Xavier Howard and kicker Jason Sanders, were not drafted in 19, 20, or 21. As we know, they were obviously drafted prior to that. Gase had a little something to say with that, about that, right? But if the past 3 drafts is the reason the Dolphins will be good or not, as Flores says, then it makes sense to put a lot of focus on those players. And that's true. But and here's part of the reason why and again, because they're obviously the players you put out there, but it's a little unfair, and this is part of the reason why I say it's shifting responsibility, because he picked these guys. Like last year, Tua was not ready to go in. He just wasn't, from a physical standpoint, from, you know, being back from his injuries and then having gotten injured twice, or, you know, from knowing the offense and, you know, blah, 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 right? So he was not ready. A lot of these guys are just being thrown straight into the fire, right? And they don't have a lot of, you know, veteran leadership and quality, you know, experience and talent at the top. Their coaching staff is churning heavily each season, as is the roster, right? And so there's a lot of things that are making it extraordinarily difficult on these guys living up to their potential, okay? And it's a problem. Let's see. And so, you know, yes, you know, obviously, but obviously the players, but they're all on rookie deals. Pretty much the entire team is on a rookie contract, or like at least half the team is on fucking rookie contracts right now, and are the guys that they took. So they have to be able to then take responsibility, and trust me, they will, because again, if they do not meet that lofty threshold, I'm telling you, Stephen Ross is not going to have the patience for it. He's getting too old and too impatient, and he wants to have a winner now. And if they do not deliver, Flores and Greer, and if they do regress at all, if they do not hit double-digit wins, if they don't make it to the playoffs, and then especially if these players from the first 3 drafts, you know, end up, you know, having a lot of their upside negated or taken away because of, you know, injuries and, you know, other things, well, it's not going to be looking good for their jobs. Anyway, and here they are. Here are the drafts. 2019, defensive line Christian Wilkins, guard center Michael Dieter, outside linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel, running back Myles Gaskin. So, pause right there. I'm going to give you a quick evaluation of those guys for me. Christian Wilkins, he's been okay. Michael Dieter has been garbage. Andrew Van Ginkel has been okay, a little bit above average. Running back Myles Gaskin, okay, a little bit above average, right? That's kind of what they've gotten from those three guys other than Michael Dieter. We'll see if he's any good at center. We'll see if he's even on the team going forward. He's a guy that could potentially be cut because he's just not very good. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But the other three guys, including their first round pick, Christian Wilkins, they've just been okay to slightly above average, right? 2020, quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, Austin Jackson, Noah Igbenogany, Robert Hunt, Raekwon Davis, Brandon Jones, Solomon Kindley, Jason Strourbridge, Blake Ferguson, and Malcolm Perry. And of course, they don't list Curtis Weaver because they already cut him, right? And of course, they don't list, of course, he didn't list Chandler Cox and Isaiah Prince from the 2019 draft because they already cut those guys, right? But Tua Tagovailoa, real quick, again, and I like the kid. I like his personality. I like his, spirit, and his talent's great. His ceiling's high, but he has to go. Like, if he was Trey Lance going into an already established system with, really good players all around him, including on his offensive line, I think he could be a really, really, really good quarterback in this league. He just happened to go to a shitty fucking team that just tanked the prior season and has a bunch of clowns that have no idea what they're doing and are just literally taking fucking shots into the dark left and right, hoping that, putting all of their money on just a fucking slew of gambles. Anyway, but the thing is, I told you, obviously there's my philosophy of never take a quarterback in rounds 1 or 2 and, every year in 3 or later, blah, blah, blah. But I wouldn't have taken Tua, especially because he's undersized and has a significant injury history. And a lot of it is to his lower extremities. And he's supposed to be able to be mobile, right? That's supposed to be a big part of his game, right? And I find it hard to believe that he's going to have longevity to his career, especially here with the Dolphins. So, it's concerning to me, and I think it's going to end up worse off for the Dolphins. Again, not because I don't like the kid or don't think he has potential or anything. It's just not. It just doesn't make sense for the circumstance and everything that he's going into. Anyway, but again, this is Stephen Ross's plan. Austin Jackson, I thought, was a reach. Noah Igbenogany, I wouldn't have taken at all. I would have taken the top safety there. As a matter of fact, instead of, Tua, of course, I would have taken an offensive lineman, whatever, and then I would have taken one of those quarterbacks in the 4th or 5th round, whichever one didn't have the off-the-field issues. Anyway, so Austin Jackson, I thought, was a reach and still has a long way to go. I wouldn't have taken Igbenogany, and I mean, his rookie season was and he has a lot to prove, but he likely will get a chance, considering the some of the players being cut in the secondary and likely to still be cut. Excuse me. Robert Hunt, I mean, and Raekwon Davis, the next two, a lot of people, and even Brandon Jones, a lot of people are really raving about them, but I think that they still have a lot to prove, especially when you considering the fact that they all just had, okay seasons individually on an above average team, in large part because they were helped to the quality of the opponent, etc., etc. Yes, I'm going to keep going back to those things and repeating them because they're very important parts of the context when evaluating the situation. They weren't as good as what people make them out to be last year. They overachieved unquestionably. Solomon Kindley, Jason Strourbridge, he's another one that could end up getting cut. Malcolm Perry, and sure, some of these guys, and a lot of these guys would be, I mean, if they cut Michael Dieter, that was 3rd round, right? Some of these guys are later round, but that hurts your draft percentage, right? And proves further. Now, we don't know. We have to wait and see how the thing shakes out, the 53. But there are still several guys. But even just based off of some rooms are crowded, like the wide receiver room. Malcolm Perry could be gone just because of that. Even the offensive line is a bit crowded with all of these guys now, with Austin Jackson, Dieter, Hunt, Kinley, Fluker, Skura, Eichenberg, right? Some of these guys are gonna, Larnell Coleman, some of these guys are gonna have to go, bro. Like, they can't have them all. Now, it's possible one or two of them might, slip by on waivers after they get cut, and they can make it to the practice squad, but maybe they don't. And then, even if they turn out to be great players, which you can, give them credit for after the fact, later down the road, once that proves to be the case, and the draft class rating can go up or whatever, but it doesn't then help the Dolphins, because then you lost the player, and we've already seen that happen, right? I think that's what happened with Isaiah Prince and when he went to the Bengals. Anyway, right? And then this year, Jalen Waddle, Jalen Phillips, Javon Holland, Eichenberg, Hunter Long, Coleman, and Dokes. Dokes, there's a possibility he might not make the roster, right? There are several players from these first few drafts that could end up being cut. They're already at 3 players. Now, to be fair, there are 24 players in all from these first 3 drafts, because they have had a lot of picks, especially last year. So they have 21 remaining from the first 3 drafts. That does include this 3rd draft and the, 2, 4, 6, 7 picks from this draft. So that's 17 picks from the first 2. So they have 14 players out of those first 17 left. Okay, now let's see how it shakes out with the 53. Anyway, so looking at this list and doing a little projecting, I count as many as 15 of Miami's starting 25, including the 3 specialists, kicker, punter, and long snapper. Okay, so he's saying that 15 of these players on this list from the first 3 drafts are going to be starters on the team. The first 25 starters, right? 11 starters on defense, 11 starters on offense, and 3 specialists, kicker, punter, long snapper. And that is being generous, because I'm counting Van Ginkel and Jones, who started some but not all games in 2020, and I'm also counting Waddle, Phillips, Holland, Eichenberg, and Long, none of whom has had even one NFL practice. Looking further at this group, it's clear the Dolphins are hoping the veterans will make considerable improvements from how they played previously to account for some of the team's noise-making ability. Why? Because 2019 first-round pick Christian Wilkins has been a solid pick at number 13 overall in the 2019 draft, but he has been primarily a run stopper. He has only 3.5 career sacks and 7 quarterback hits, and last year he had a half sack less and 1 quarterback hit less than his rookie year. Again, he's just been okay. It's clear the Dolphins need more impact plays out of Wilkins, and it would be good if they come in the form of pass pressure, but even in the run game has had 0 forced fumbles in 2 years, right? And so if that's just all he is, then do people really believe he lived up to 13th overall? Right? And I thought that he was a reach at 13 overall, right? And so I would have done things differently. Anyway, there's no point in going back to that. You can watch my old videos. Anyway, because Gaskin was a pleasant surprise in his second season, earning the starting running back job after being taken in the 7th round in 2019, but where he went in the draft no longer matters. He is likely going to be the starter when training camp begins. He needs to show more playmaking and ability, and needs to stay healthy after missing 6 games last season. Can that be the case? Because the team is heavily relying on Van Ginkel to take a big step from his 5.5 sacks of last season, the expectation was partially the reason the Dolphins moved on from Kyle Van Noy. But can he, though? Right? And again, we're not expected to have at least so much of an impact in the injury department this season, because despite COVID, the NFL appears to be going full steam ahead with, live workouts and training camp, etc., etc., etc. So they should at least be more conditioned and probably have less injuries, and injuries will still be a part, Also, let's note though that in the grand scheme of things, the Dolphins were pretty lucky last year in that department, and that's one of the things that led to them being able to, dominate over some teams and play better against some teams than they should have, because they were, one of the healthier teams. And unfortunately, just like you can't expect Xavier Howard to come down with 10 interceptions per season and your defense to fucking, run games for you, for your quarterback who can't do anything and your offense who can't do anything, right? It's not, you can't always rely on those things, right? Anyway, so, you're not going to be able to rely on your team being one of the healthiest teams in the league, right? Anyway, so like Gaskin, Van Ginkel was a pleasant surprise in his second year, but he must deliver more in his third season. Again, they're just all right and slightly above average players. That's all they've proven to be so far. I hope they take steps forward, but, again, they like to reach on players. A lot of, and for what for whatever it's worth, whatever you take it, a lot of their picks, people, the experts have said that too. A lot of people have been, it's kind of a reach, but, trust the process, and in Flores we trust, blah, 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 blah. Right. So, we'll see, man. I don't think this, and then when you throw the injury concerns on top of it, especially to some of their, highest investments in their most, high upside players like Tua and Waddle and, Jalen Phillips, well, it's a recipe for disaster, because none of the offensive linemen the Dolphins have drafted before 2021, Dieter, Hunt, Jackson, Kinley, have been good enough. They have all started at some point, but even the most ardent fan understands starting is one thing while playing well is something totally different. The real encouraging news with this group is they all are very young and all are expected to improve based on their circumstances. All of them. Now, when I read through this the first time, I was curious, what do you mean circumstances? Because for my evaluation, they're not. They're expected to just simply because they're expected to, and some of these guys have potential high ceilings. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, okay? And they certainly have a long way to go in proving that they can and do that. They can do that and do that consistently. But what are the circumstances that are in place? Because their coaching staff has changed yet again. There's no continuity or consistency. The entire offensive line pretty much is probably going to be first or second year players, unless you have, Skura at center, which is likely to be a disaster in and of itself, right? So, what do you mean? What do you mean? What exactly, what circumstances are in place? And you even said it yourself, they haven't been good enough. Not really even close, especially considering, again, a lot of the teams that they ended up playing last year that have really good pass rushers on their defense, they didn't have to play against last year because they were hurt or on the COVID list, right? The Rams were an example of that. The Broncos were an example of that. The 49ers were an example of that. A bunch of these teams, right? So the Bills didn't have their, top two linebackers the one game. Anyway, because the Dolphins are confident Tagovailoa is the right guy. He had some troubles last year, especially the final 2 weeks of the season, but the Dolphins seem certain Tagovailoa will be more like the quarterback who played against Arizona, 20 of 28, 248 yards and 2 touchdowns, than the one who finished the year at Buffalo, 35 of 58 for 361 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. Let's note though, and everybody's talking about, oh, look at the way that they're building their team. They're going to be a spread offense and they're going to really let Tua fly. That means they're going to have to give him time to do that. So you're again latching on to something super narrow and specific. And what if your offensive line does not take that step forward and he's running for his life a lot? Especially when the top premier pass rushers get back into the game and they have to play this offensive line has to play them. And Eichenberg's out at right tackle and fucking Jackson and fucking all these guys get overwhelmed because, anyway. So if you're going to have him throw like that, and you have to throw in the added context that nobody talks about. The dude actually threw fucking 10 plus interceptions last year. They didn't all officially count because of a few different reasons. The Dolphins are a team that is heavily invested in adding picks. General manager Chris Grier and Flores have done a very nice job of adding young players with high draft pedigrees throughout their roster. But they also have a lot of these guys have a ton of potential downside and in concerning areas. The areas you don't want to take risks at, injuries, right, is one of the major ones. They love to reach on guys, etc. Anyway, in year 3 of their administration, never call it a regime, as these guys aren't an authoritarian government. They kind of are, though. Obviously not to the same level as, like, you know, the United States government or whatever. But look at the way that they run business, bro. They are pretty authoritarian. So, and then even look at the way that they talk about Flores. Oh, he doesn't take no crap. If he thinks you're fucking, if he doesn't see you developing like he wants, he's gonna cut you in half. Yeah, but that's his job to develop you. So, and I mean, if you're not developing like he thought you would, that's also not just on his development skills, but also his evaluation skills. So again, that doesn't reflect good on him. People just don't think these things through. Anyway, have set themselves up to ride or die with those many high pedigreed picks. That's true. They are going to ride or die, and that's why I said this season is the season. Soon we will see if the picks develop into excellent players. Well, soon we will. So far, they haven't gotten off to a very good start. Again, you know, it's only year 3 for the 19 draft, only year 2 for the 20, and year 1 for the 21. But again, if they have an underwhelming season and, you know, these players in these first 3 drafts, if they cut a couple more, 1 or 2 more, and then if they, you know, get exposed, they might not even be around. And then what? Grier and Flores, right? Because if they get fired because they go 7 and 10. I mean, imagine that. Imagine they went 7 and 10, and they have kind of a rough year. I mean, that's still 7 wins, and it's really not that big of a setback. But imagine if that happens, and then Stephen Ross fires Flores and Grier. I mean, my guess is a lot of Dolphins fans will feel how I felt when they fired Adam Gase, because they will feel betrayed, and they will think that, you know, their guy got fired and, you know, blah, 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 their guys, right? That's my guess. But I'm just saying, and I'll end this on, I hope I'm wrong, but what if I'm right? Anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and get up out of here. I hope you guys appreciate my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comments section. And of course, as always, follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.